So I want to talk about two important considerations that are going to help narrow down your search for a new saddle, make you comfortable on the bike, extend those training hours, as a result make you faster. Let's dive into it. All right, so here to help us with the discussion, we have these new offerings from Specialized provided by Performance Bike for review, but I'm going to start with this crazy looking thing, which is the ISM. Now, in order to understand why it's shaped this way, we're going to talk about the first and most important consideration when you're selecting a new saddle, and that is your sit bone measurement. So your sit bones is actually the very bottom of your pelvis. In order to measure that, there's a few different ways. The way that I find is the easiest, the way that I measure mine, the way that I have my athletes measure theirs. Get a piece of aluminum foil, put it over a towel, sit down, and then stand up. It's that simple. You're going to see two impressions in the aluminum foil. Mark them with a dot, and then get a measuring tape just like this one. Measure the distance between the dots, and voila, you have your sit bone measurement. This is going to be the basis for your saddle selection. Now, I learned something through cycling. Actually, I learned a couple of things through cycling about our sit bones. They vary wildly. Between men, between women, even among men, they vary wildly. And that's the other thing that I learned. It's about myself. I have very narrow sit bones. So let's use mine as an example to help guide your selection of a saddle. I have 90 millimeter sit bones. Now, traditional wisdom, bike fitters would take your sit bone measurement, add 25 millimeters. So that would be 115 millimeters for me. That is how wide your saddle should be. Now, even something really narrow like this ISM saddle is still, I think this is 130 millimeters, still too wide by that standard. And that's where I think this traditional method is wrong. And it can mislead you into buying the wrong saddle. Let me explain how this works. So for me, I like something a little bit wider in the back because I want that backstop. When I'm climbing, it feels really good to have that extra support in the back. So I'm willing to go beyond that sit bone plus 25 measurement. And I like something generally more in like the 130 to 140 millimeter range. The other consideration, this is an important one, is what style riding you're doing. So in addition to your sit bones, you have to think about what type of riding you're doing, and that is going to help you determine which, because you can see the variation in some of these saddles is pretty drastic. So let's take the ISM, for example, because that's kind of on one end of the spectrum. ISM designed their saddles with triathletes and with time trialists in mind, who are sitting on a bike with their hips rotated, their pelvis rotated forward in this really low, tucked aerodynamic position in the skis on a time trial bike. And they were smart about it. They thought, okay, sit bone measurements are 2 points, right? Well, actually not, because it's the bottom of your pelvis, and as your pelvis rotates, the sit bone measurement actually narrows as well. So that's why you have this crazy looking design where you have these two prongs that come inward, because as you rotate your hips, you are continued to be supported by these two prongs up front. Now, the idea in principle is great, and I use this saddle for years. I love this saddle. The problem is, look at the support here on these two prongs. It is very narrow, so it's not very forgiving. Let me try to show it here. Are you seeing how narrow and how kind of sharp this padding is right here? So this works if you're on a time trial bike, because you just plant yourself on the saddle and you start pumping your legs, and it's just you versus the time, right? Like that's what a time trial is. But crit racing is different. So in principle, I can apply the same concept to crit racing. Hey, it's short, high intensity, high speed racing. I want to get low and narrow on the front end. Great. The problem becomes a matter of stability in the saddle when you are constantly getting out of the saddle, back in the saddle. You're taking a corner, you're getting out, you're doing a sharp effort, you're sitting back down. Now, you're not just planted at the front of this saddle, smashing watts all the time in a crit. And for that reason, your sit bones can roll off this front because there isn't much support. And take my word for it, it's painful. So I love the ISM, but it had this major shortcoming. And that's where the Specialized Power Saddle came in. Now, it's not as an extreme looking of a design, but I adopted the Power Saddle for a couple of specific reasons. The first one is, if you actually take a look at these two together, let me just line them up here. If you cut the very nose off the Power Saddle, it is the ISM, but it's refined. It's refined in a few different ways. The first one is you have that backstop I was talking about. It's not quite as narrow as the ISM. You don't feel like you're going to slide off the back when you're climbing. Again, That wasn't a consideration with the ISM because this is for time trialists. But now this is for the road racer. So it's a refined design. It has the wider back. This is the Power Expert. It has this mirror padding technology. We'll talk more about it when we get into these guys. But it is 143 millimeters in the back. So it has that stability that I like in the back, especially when I'm climbing. And it also has this narrowing in the front that I like when I'm going hard in a crit. The problem, though, the shortcoming with this specific power saddle is again, it's the same thing as the ISM. It is unforgiving. You can see there isn't a whole lot of space here for your sit bones to rest when push comes to shove in a crit. It can be painful if you roll off. Now, it's not as extreme as the ISM, but it's still not quite there. And that's where we get this newest iteration of the Specialized Power Saddle. Now, of course, this is the most expensive one. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but this is the S-Works Power. Anything that says S-Works is going to be more expensive, but it's for good reason. Now, part of it is carbon rails, and I love the way they've implemented these carbon rails. You can see it's actually one piece. I've had problems with other carbon railed saddles cracking here in the middle or even being disjointed from the carbon shell. But the biggest thing is what the front of this saddle looks like. Because coming back to that second consideration, the style of racing you're going to be doing is going to greatly determine what type of saddle you're looking for. And in my case, crit racing is what I focus on. I'm going to be spending a lot of my time low, narrow, and really rotated on the front end, meaning my already narrow sit bones are going to be even narrower. I'm going to be spending a lot of time up here on the business end of the saddle. And look at the difference here. Let's take a look between these two right here. The ISM and the newest iteration of the power saddle. I mean, look how much more forgiving and flat this power saddle is. So same concept, but the power saddle has just taken it one step further in refinement. And now they have this soft mirror this mirror padding, which is like this 3D printed mesh, but it's also not, it's not this convex shape. It's flat on the tops here, and it's more forgiving for crit racing. And that is why this is the saddle that I select. But here's what I'll leave you guys with. It depends on your sit bone width, right? We talked about that. It also depends on the style of racing you're going to be doing. Because if you're going to be doing longer road races, Grand Fondos, you might be looking for something that is much more supportive here at the back, a much more pronounced backstop. This is still a 143 millimeter wide saddle on the back, but this is the Roman Evo. I wanted to like this saddle, but it just didn't suit the style of racing that I do. It's the right width for me, but once you get rotated on the front here, like I talked about, I mean, the padding's there, and it's flat like I like. But help me understand, guys, what is the front of this saddle for? It doesn't work for me, but like I said, it depends on the style of racing that you're doing, right? So with all that said, this is the saddle that's going to go back onto my bike, but your mileage might vary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a link for all of these down in the description. And I want you guys to go check out the new lineup from Specialized over at performancebike.com because they have so many offerings of different widths, of different styles. There's going to be something to meet your needs. And I want to thank Specialized for coming out with these saddles, but I want to thank Performance Bike for providing these for review. Without them, these videos would not be possible. So I appreciate your support. Thanks for hanging in there. Catch you guys in the next one.